Let's talk about Chase Holloway, 22 years old, born and raised in Scottsdale, Arizona, a city so aggressively air-conditioned that Chase genuinely believed, until the age of 19, that summer was just a vibe people talked about on Instagram. He grew up in a house with 4 bathrooms, a smart refrigerator that texted his mom when the oat milk was running low, and a Ring doorbell that his dad checked more often than his actual front door. Chase's childhood was a seamless sequence of Chick-fil-A drive-thrus, weekend trips to the Scottsdale Quarter Mall, and the kind of suburban comfort that makes a person fundamentally, constitutionally, chemically unprepared for anything that involves physical discomfort, manual labor, or the absence of a charging port within arm's reach. He was, by every measurable standard, the final boss of a civilization that had optimized itself into absolute softness. And he wore that softness like a badge of honor. Like a limited edition hoodie from a brand you've never heard of that costs $300 and says nothing on it. By the time he was 22, Chase had built what he called a content ecosystem around what he described as intentional living. Which, again, meant that he rearranged his apartment for hours, bought a $14 latte from a place called Vessel that only accepted payment through an app, and filmed himself drinking it with the window light hitting his face at the exact angle that made him look like a Renaissance painting if the Renaissance had been sponsored by Spotify. He had 340 low-to-zone followers. He had a skincare routine that involved 11 steps and a jade roller he kept in the fridge. He had strong opinions about blue light glasses, weighted blankets, and the ethical implications of fast fashion, which he expressed regularly on his platform while wearing sneakers made in conditions he would rather not investigate. He was not a bad person. He was simply a person who had been so thoroughly insulated from consequence, from discomfort, from the basic friction of existence, that reality had become optional for him. Something you doom-scrolled past on the way to another aesthetic reel. This is important context. Hold on to it.
It's here.
On the morning of the incident, Chase was sitting cross-legged on his linen duvet. Linen, because cotton holds energy differently. Unboxing a package that had arrived via Amazon Prime in the customary 37 minutes that he now considered the absolute maximum acceptable wait time for anything in his life. The box contained a universal remote control he had impulse purchased at 2 in the morning after seeing a 7-second TikTok ad that described the product as capable of controlling anything in the known universe. A claim that Chase, whose media literacy apparently had a bedtime, took at face value.
That's not what I ordered.
The remote was made of cheap matte plastic, had one single red button in the center, and had 47 one-star reviews on the product page with titles like, "Do not buy," "This thing opened my garage at 3 a.m., and most presciently, "I don't know where my husband is." Chase had not read the reviews. Chase had read the brand's Instagram bio, which said, "We make the impossible possible."
Systems online.
And that was enough for him. He picked it up. He pointed it at nothing in particular. The way you do when you don't know what you're doing, but you're doing it confidently. And then he pressed the button. The sound was like a microwave oven being dropped into a swimming pool from a considerable height. His laptop screen froze on a black and white photograph of a crowded street that his algorithm had surfaced. Tenement buildings, push cart vendors, children in the dirt, horses pulling wagons through mud. Dated 1883, Lower East Side, New York City. His Philips Hue lights flickered through every color on the spectrum. His diffuser, which had been misting Hinoka cypress and bergamot into the room, made a sound like a drain being cleared, and then there was nothing. No apartment, no linen duvet, no jade roller, no 11 steps. Just Chase, in his moisture-wicking athleisure set and his limited edition New Balance 990s, standing on a wooden sidewalk on Orchard Street in Manhattan in the summer of 1883. surrounded by a smell so total, so three-dimensional, so absolutely committed to being a smell, that his first physical response was to look down at his feet to confirm that the source of the odor was not somehow himself. It was not himself. It was everything else. It was the entire world. Welcome to New York, buddy. The real one. The first thing Chase did was check his phone. Of course it was. The screen showed no signal, no carrier, no nothing. Just the wallpaper. Which was a photo of his diffuser on a marble countertop, mocking him with its clean eucalyptus steam and its perfect life. The battery was at 71%, which is the kind of detail your brain locks onto when everything else is collapsing, because 71% is a number you understand. It is a number from your world, and your brain is going to hold on to it like a life raft in the ocean of sensory information, currently assaulting you from every direction. He looked up from the phone. He looked at the street, and the street looked back. Orchard Street in 1883 was not a street in the way that Chase understood streets. It was a living organism. It was noise and motion and smell layered so densely that it felt less like a place and more like a physical argument. Pushcart vendors lined both sides of the narrow road, shouting in Yiddish, Italian, Polish, and at least 2 languages Chase could not identify, selling everything from pickled herring out of open barrels to second-hand coats to live chickens in wooden crates. The chickens were not happy. The horses, and there were many horses, doing what horses in 1883 did constantly and without apology in the middle of the road, were also not particularly happy. The children running between the carts were barefoot, filthy, and moving with the kind of purposeful energy that comes not from adequate nutrition, but from the biological imperative to keep moving or be stepped on. The adults looked like people who had stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago. They looked at Chase, in his moisture-wicking pants and his pristine white sneakers, holding a glowing rectangle and turning in a slow circle with his mouth open, and most of them simply went around him the way water goes around a rock, because in 1883 on the Lower East Side, people did not have the luxury of stopping to process anomalies. The smell. We need to talk about the smell. Chase had, at various points in his life, complained about the smell of his neighbor's cooking, the smell of the gym at peak hours, the smell of a rideshare driver's air freshener, and the smell of a specific brand of candle that he described as cloying and honestly violent. None of this had prepared him. The Lower East Side in summer was a symphony of odors conducted by a composer who had never heard of subtlety. Horse manure, first and most aggressively, coating everything like a bass note in a perfume from hell. Under that, the brine of the pickle barrels, which was actually one of the more tolerable elements, but combined with everything else, became something else entirely. Under that, the accumulated human sweat of a population living 8 and 10 and 12 to a room in buildings with no ventilation and no running water, in a summer that was offering no relief whatsoever. Under that, rotten produce from the carts that didn't sell, and the gray water thrown from upper floor windows because that was where gray water went. And underneath all of it, threading through everything like a baseline, the smell of the tenements themselves, decades of coal smoke, mildew, unwashed wool, and the particular staleness of air that has been breathed by too many people in too small a space for too long, with no window large enough to make a difference. Chase stood in the middle of all of it with his face doing something that had never been asked of his face before. His nose was sending his brain information that his brain was refusing to categorize. His brain was still trying to load. A woman brushed past him with a basket of fabric on her hip, moving with the efficient muscle memory speed of someone who had not had the option of moving slowly in years. She said something to him in Yiddish that his expression told her was not landing. She switched to heavily accented English. "Move, you're blocking." He moved. He stepped off the wooden sidewalk and his New Balance 990, which had been pristine 40 seconds ago, made contact with the street surface, which was not pavement in any sense Chase understood. It was packed dirt and gravel and horse situation and the remnants of 1,000 previous days of exactly this. The shoe sank slightly. Chase looked down at his shoe. Chase made a sound that was not quite a word in any language. He walked. There was nothing else to do. He walked up Orchard Street and then turned onto Hester Street because the smell on Hester Street was marginally different, which is the same as saying it was marginally better, which is doing a lot of work for the word marginally. The buildings on either side of him were 5 and 6 stories of dark brick, their facades hung with laundry on lines strung between the windows, shirts and long underwear and stockings flapping in air that was too hot and too thick to be drying anything efficiently. Every window was open. From those windows came the sounds of the tenements, babies, arguments, the rhythmic thudding of machinery, coughing, so much coughing. This is something that does not make it into the romantic, sepia-toned, historical imagination of what the 1880s were: the coughing, tuberculosis, cholera still lurking, typhoid, diphtheria, the bodies of people living in overcrowded rooms with no ventilation, working 14-hour days in factories with airborne particulates, eating food that was nutritionally inadequate and often contaminated. Those bodies coughed. They coughed all the time. It was the ambient sound of poverty, the way birdsong is the ambient sound of a park, except instead of birds it was lungs, and instead of a park it was a building where 40 families shared 2 outhouses in the backyard. Chase did not know what tuberculosis sounded like. He was about to learn. A man leaned out of a second-floor window above him and coughed, a deep, wet, sustained event that ended with the man spitting into the street with the casual precision of someone who had been doing it all his life. Chase watched this happen directly in front of him. He stepped back. He looked at his hands. He looked at his phone again. 68%. His Instagram was trying to refresh and failing. Of course it was failing. The concept of a cellular network was 60 years away from existing, but his phone didn't know that and was trying its best, spinning its little wheel, connecting to nothing like a very loyal dog waiting for an owner who is never coming home. He needed water. He understood this intellectually. It was hot. It was July. He had been standing in direct sun for 20 minutes, and his body, which was accustomed to a water bottle with a time-stamped motivational message on it reminding him to hydrate, was starting to register a complaint. Finding water in 1883 on the Lower East Side was not the same as finding water in 2024 in Scottsdale. There was no filtered dispenser. There was no branded bottle. There was a communal tap in the courtyard of a tenement building on the corner, fed by the Croton water system, which was, to be fair, a genuine engineering achievement of the city. But the pipe itself was shared by the entire building. The ground around it was perpetually damp and muddy, and the tin cup hanging next to the tap on a piece of string had been used by everyone in the building since the previous tap cup had been lost sometime in the spring. Chase approached the tap. He looked at the cup. The cup looked back at him with the energy of a cup that had seen things. He turned the tap. Brown-tinged water ran out. It cleared after a moment. He looked at the cup again. He did not use the cup. He put his hand under the tap and drank from his palm, which his body accepted gratefully, and his brain filed away under things we will process later when we're safe. He was not going to be safe for a while, but his body didn't know that yet either. Bro, he's literally cupping 19th century municipal water into his mouth with a hand that just touched a horse manure sidewalk, and his biggest concern is that the cup looked unsanitary. The self-awareness is not there. The self-awareness has taken a leave of absence and is currently somewhere in a cryogenic chamber in Scottsdale waiting for the Wi-Fi to come back. The housing. We have to talk about the housing, because this is where it gets real. Chase, following a combination of instinct and the vague sense that if he kept moving, something would make sense, ended up in the courtyard of a tenement building on Ludlow Street, drawn in by a woman who mistook him, in his athletic clothes and his confused expression, for a new boarder that her neighbor had mentioned was arriving. She spoke to him in a mix of broken English and Polish, gestured at a door, and before Chase had processed what was happening, he was standing inside a tenement apartment. And the apartment was telling him everything he needed to know about the 19th century in a single glance, and he was not ready to receive the information. The apartment was 2 rooms. 2 rooms for the Kowalski family, which consisted of a mother, a father, 4 children between the ages of 6 and 14, and 2 boarders who paid 50 cents a week each to sleep in shifts on a pallet on the floor. The front room served as the kitchen, the dining room, the living room, and, because the father was a tailor who worked from home to supplement his factory income, the workshop. The back room was the bedroom, containing 1 bed and the pallet, and it had 1 window that faced the air shaft between buildings, which meant the window could be open for ventilation. But what it ventilated was the air shaft, which collected smells the way a valley collects fog, dense and inescapable. The kitchen had a coal stove that radiated heat into a room that was already 85 degrees. On the stove was a pot. Chase looked at the pot. The pot contained something that was gray and liquid and dense with things he could not immediately identify. Things that were perhaps vegetable in origin, but had been cooked for so long that they had given up their individual identities and become part of a collective, a shared project of nutrition that prioritized caloric function over anything resembling flavor or visual appeal. Mrs. Kowalski ladled some into a tin bowl and held it out to Chase with the matter-of-fact generosity of someone who had very little and gave it anyway. Because that is what people did, and because community was not a wellness buzzword in 1883, it was a survival strategy. Chase held the bowl. He looked at the contents. The contents had a smell that was not offensive so much as aggressively humble. Boiled cabbage, something that might be a potato, a bone that had already been boiled at least twice before, and was now contributing primarily symbolically to the flavor of the broth. There were no calories in this bowl that were not working extremely hard. This bowl was the opposite of a $14 artisanal latte. This bowl was the anti-vessel. Chase ate it. He ate it because he was hungry and because the woman who made it was looking at him with an expression of quiet dignity that made him feel somewhere very deep and previously unactivated inside himself, genuinely ashamed of his entire existence. He ate the whole thing. It tasted like sustenance stripped down to its load-bearing walls. It tasted like the minimum. It was enough. He did not ask for oat milk, the work. Oh, the work. Because Chase Holloway, in the first full day of his tenure in 1883, made the tactical error of accepting a shift at a nearby cigar factory when the foreman, a man who had the face of someone who had not experienced surprise since the Grant administration, saw him standing idle in the street and interpreted idleness as availability. The factory was on the upper floor of a building on Allen Street. The windows were small. The summer air that came through them was the same summer air that was everywhere else, hot and dense, but inside the factory, it had the added notes of tobacco leaf and the particular closeness of 25 people sitting in rows at long tables, rolling cigars for 14 hours with a 30-minute break for whatever they had brought to eat, which for most people was a piece of bread and, if it was a good week, something to put on the bread. Chase sat down at a table. Someone showed him how to roll. His fingers, which were accustomed to the ergonomic keyboard and the glass surface of a smartphone, immediately made clear that they had no aptitude for this. His first cigar looked like something a child had made out of wet leaves on a dare. The foreman looked at it. The foreman looked at Chase. No words were exchanged that were fit for a family audience. Chase rolled cigars for 11 hours. By the third hour, his back, which had only previously been asked to support him through yoga flows on a cork mat with breathable leggings, was registering a formal complaint with his central nervous system. By the fifth hour, the complaint had escalated. By the eighth hour, his back had stopped complaining and started simply existing in a new state of being, a state in which pain was not an event but a constant, like weather. His fingers were raw. The tobacco had stained the tips of his fingers brown. His eyes, accustomed to the blue light filtered glow of multiple screens, were struggling with the combination of the dim lighting and the fine motor precision required. The boy next to him, maybe 10 years old, maybe 12. It was hard to tell because the children of the tenements were often small for their age due to the very straightforward reason that they did not have enough food, rolled twice as fast as Chase without apparent effort. Chase watched this child with the expression of a man whose entire self-concept was being quietly dismantled in real time. He was paid 60 cents for the 11 hours.
Damn it.
60 cents.
6 times 9.
He held the coins in his raw tobacco-stained hand and did the math without wanting to. He had spent $14 on a latte 10 days ago. He spent $60 on a candle last month. A candle. There was a long moment in which Chase Holloway stood on the street outside the cigar factory in the heavy dusk of a summer evening and did not move and did not speak, and something was happening behind his eyes that was too serious and too quiet to make fun of, so we'll skip past it and get back to the suffering, which was more productive for everyone. No Starbucks here, buddy. Not even a bad one. Not even a gas station coffee. There is a push cart on the corner selling chicory coffee for a penny a cup, and it tastes like someone described coffee to a person who had never had coffee and asked them to make something hot and brown. And even that penny feels significant right now, doesn't it, Chase? The sanitation situation? Listen, I'm not going to be delicate about this because the 19th century was not delicate about this. The tenement building on Ludlow Street had 2 outhouses in the shared courtyard. 2 for 40-plus families. The outhouses were wood-framed structures over pits, and in summer, the experience of approaching them was something you began preparing for from about 30 feet away. There was no toilet paper in the modern sense. There was newspaper. Where available, there was whatever else was available. Chase, who had a bathroom cabinet containing 17 different hygiene products, including a Japanese washlet-style bidet seat attachment that his therapist had once described as perhaps a healthy relationship with comfort, stood in the courtyard of the Ludlow Street tenement at 7 in the morning on his second day and understood, at a molecular level, what the phrase taking things for granted actually meant. He had used the phrase many times. He had never understood it until this moment, in this courtyard, in this heat looking at this outhouse. He had not showered. There was no shower. There was a basin of water in the apartment, heated on the coal stove, shared by everyone in the household. Bathing in the way Chase understood bathing, the 12-minute hot shower with the eucalyptus shower steamers and the double shampoo and the leave-in conditioner did not exist as a concept for working-class people in 1883. You washed your face and hands. You washed what needed washing. You wore your work clothes until they were washed on Sunday, if Sunday allowed for washing, which it often didn't. Because Sunday was also the day you did the mending and prepared food for the week, and if you were Jewish, you had religious obligations, and if you were not Jewish, you might have church. And either way, there was not a lot of Sunday left for leisure in the way Chase understood leisure, which was scrolling for 40 minutes before deciding he didn't feel like doing anything and ordering delivery instead. His hair. He touched his hair on day 3 and felt it and made a small sound and then sat very still for a while. His skincare routine was entirely gone. His face, without its 11 steps, its vitamin C serum, its niacinamide, its SPF 50, was experiencing the full unmediated impact of New York City's summer in 1883, which meant coal soot, tobacco, sweat, and the kind of sun exposure that dermatologists of the future would look at and describe, using the word damage quietly but repeatedly. Bro is literally grieving his moisturizer. He keeps touching his face like he's checking for something that's already gone. A kid who grew up with filtered water and a gua sha stone, and now his daily skincare is a rag, some water, and hope. The Jade Roller is in Scottsdale. The Jade Roller is safe. The Jade Roller is doing better than Chase right now. On the 4th day, Chase got sick. Of course he did. His immune system, which had been maintained in the comfortable equilibrium of a first world lifestyle, good nutrition, controlled environment, access to health care, hand sanitizer on every corner, was now encountering the full microbial democracy of 18 out of 3 New York without preparation or introduction. It started as stomach trouble, which in the context of the tenement was both extremely common and also terrifying, because cholera was not a historical artifact in 1883. It was a recurring visitor, and stomach trouble was how it introduced itself. Mrs. Kowalski, who had seen this before, made him drink boiled water and gave him a piece of dry bread and told him to rest. And he lay on the pallet in the back room feeling, for the first time in his life, genuinely mortal. Not Instagram sad. Not, I need a mental health day. Actually, physically, concretely mortal, in a way that the 19th century was very good at making a person feel. Because in 1883, mortality was not an abstract concept you thought about during meditation. It was a neighbor. It came to visit regularly. You knew people it had taken. He lay on the pallet and listened to the sounds of the building. The baby on the floor above, crying with the particular exhausted persistence of a baby that has been crying for a long time and has no plans to stop. The sewing machine rhythm from the apartment next door, a woman who took in piecework, finishing garments, attaching buttons, hemming for pennies per piece, working past midnight by the light of a kerosene lamp, filling every waking hour that was not occupied by childcare or cooking or hauling water up 5 flights of stairs. The coffin. Always the coffin, from somewhere in the building, from everywhere in the building, an unchoreographed chorus that started before dawn and continued through the night in rotating solos. Chase listened to all of this, and for the first time since arriving, he did not think about his phone battery, which was now at 43%, or his Instagram, or the package he had been expecting before the remote control incident, which contained a new ring light. He just listened, and for the first time, the sounds resolved into something other than noise. They resolved into people, working, crying, sewing, coughing, surviving, doing what human beings have always done when the conditions are hardest, which is exactly what they need to do to get through to tomorrow, nothing more and nothing less. He got better. The stomach thing passed as stomach things usually did if you were young and otherwise healthy and lucky. And Chase Holloway was all 3 of those things, even if he had never had occasion to think about luck as something concrete and contingent rather than aesthetic. On the morning of the 6th day, he went back to the cigar factory, and his rolling was slightly better, and the 10-year-old next to him gave him a nod of professional acknowledgement that Chase stored away somewhere serious and private. He found a library. This is important. The Lower East Side of 1883 had reading rooms, places where newly arrived immigrants came to learn English, to read newspapers from home, to access the scaffolding of literacy in a new world. Chase, who had not read anything longer than a caption in approximately 4 years, sat down in a reading room on Grand Street and read. He read about the city he was in. He read a newspaper account of a fire in a nearby tenement building. 17 people, including 6 children, 3 of them under 5. The article was 6 paragraphs. The city moved on, He read about the labor movement, about the men and women who were beginning to organize, to push back against the 14-hour days and the 60-cent wages and the children at factory tables, doing it not from safety, but from within the conditions themselves, at genuine personal risk. He read in something in him, something that had been assembled from the comfortable distance of a content ecosystem was being very slowly, very quietly taken apart and put back together in a different configuration. On the 8th day, the remote control was in his pocket, which he had checked 17 times without thinking, and he was walking back from the factory when he stopped at the corner of Delancey and Orchard in the middle of the afternoon rush of the pushcart market, and he pressed the red button. He didn't know why I pressed it then instead of the 100 times before when he'd thought about pressing it. Maybe because pressing it before had felt like escape, and pressing it now felt like something else. Like he had finished something, or seen enough of something, or become someone who needed to see the rest from a different angle. The sound happened, the world went sideways. And then it was 72 degrees and the diffuser was misting Hinoki Cypress into his apartment, and his hue lights were doing a gentle sunrise simulation. And his phone was showing 4 bars of vibes and 1,700 unread notifications. Chase sat on his linen duvet and did not open Instagram. He sat there for a long time. Then he got up, went to his bathroom, and stood in front of his 11-step skincare arrangement and looked at all of it. The serums, the toners, the SPF, the jade roller, and thought about the basin of warm water and a rag. He used every single product. He wasn't going to lie about that. He used them slowly and with his eyes open, and he thought about the woman on the 4th floor of the Ludlow Street tenement, sewing by kerosene light at midnight for pennies per piece. And he thought about the 10-year-old who could roll a cigar faster than he ever would. And he thought about Mrs. Kowalski ladling gray broth into a tin bowl and holding it out to a stranger without asking for anything back. Then he went to his kitchen, which had a refrigerator that texted his mom, and he made himself a coffee. A regular one, not $14. And he sat with it, and he did not photograph it. He did not photograph it. No caption, no filter. Just the coffee and the quiet and the 43% battery on a phone that had survived 1883 and was somehow still with him, like a witness. He looked at it for a while. Then he deleted the TikTok app. Then he downloaded it again 40 minutes later because he's 22 and Rome wasn't built in a day. But the point stands. Something had moved. Something was different. You can't unsmell 1883. You can't unfeel 60 cents in your raw hand after 11 hours. The world has edges you don't see from behind a ring light, and some of them are sharp enough to leave a mark even when you're back in the air conditioning, even when the jade roller is back in the fridge, even when everything is exactly as comfortable and frictionless as it was before. The mark stays. That's the point. That's always been the point. So look, the next time your DoorDash is 8 minutes late, the next time the barista gets your order wrong, the next time the Wi-Fi buffers for 3 seconds and you feel genuinely wronged by the universe. Think about Chase Holloway, tobacco-stained, unwashed, eating gray broth and earning 60 cents for 11 hours, being handed dignity he hadn't earned by people who had every reason to hold on to it and chose generosity anyway. Think about the 10-year-old at the factory table. Think about the coffin that never stopped. Then maybe, just maybe you tip the DoorDash driver a little extra. That's it. That's the whole lesson. That and read the product reviews before you buy a universal remote. Every time. Non-negotiable.